We are an independent research agency, and we deliver social and market research projects for a very wide variety of clients, but a big portion of it is central and local government work. I've been working in research for a total of about 10 years, and that is across some agency roles, but also for central government. So I used to work for the Home Office and the Cabinet Office during doing various bits of evaluation and social research. And today we're very excited to share with you the findings from a research project that we delivered recently for the Home Office, which was a public dialogue around what the public think about the use of AI in policing. So if you bear with me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen with you because I have some slides to guide us through. I should flag today I am standing in for my colleague Lucy, who's one of our managing partners. I was a director on this project and was slightly more involved at the early stages, but still across the whole thing. In our Q&A today, I may be relying slightly on my colleague Emily, who you will see is present in the call today, who is closer to some of the detail, but I have plenty to share today as well. Okay, so I am going to firstly guide you through the background to why this project was needed. Then I'm going to talk you through the methods, and then finally go through some of the key findings. So let's get started. So the background to this project. I think it's fair to say, and this won't shock anyone, that AI is a big priority for the UK government at the moment. We've seen that in various different settings. So, for example, the UK government procuring AI contracts with companies like Palantir recently, courting major investment from US firms, US AI firms in the UK in data center construction and maintenance, that kind of thing, and more. And the same is true for policing as well. So across the country, we're finding that individual police services very much have AI on their mind. Many have already procured and started using AI software and tools in many different ways. So it's a hot topic, which no one will be surprised to hear. But it can, of course, also be very polarizing, particularly in the context of the use of AI tools in policing. So, as a moderator for some of the sessions of this project, when we asked people for their initial thoughts about AI, certainly some of the words that came up when we first started talking about it in this context were things like Robocop, the Terminator, Minority Report, that kind of thing. People's perceptions of AI in this context are influenced by things in popular culture, sci-fi in particular. And then there's also the other element of when we're talking about policing and new developments in policing, there's always the question of bias and over police communities. And it raises instinctively some particular concerns about how it might exacerbate issues to do with bias, particularly against ethnic minority communities.
Jonny, just a heads up, I think we've lost the slides. It's just
We've
gone
lost the
back to
slides.
the not it's not on the presenter view anymore, it's just gone back to the whole
Oh,
whole
how
thing.
strange. I'm just going to try and reshare my slides quickly. Sorry, everyone. No idea why that happened. Okay. Can you see the slide that says background now?
No, it's still just on the PowerPoint itself rather than
Okay.
the presentation.
Bear with me just one moment, and I'm sure I can figure this out. Um, let's see. Maybe what we'll do is just make it full screen. Can you see that now?
You're not sharing right now.
No, I'm not sharing right now. Sorry. Sorry, everyone. This is a thoroughly unprofessional sharing experience
Not
for
at all.
me.
It happens.
So I am gonna take the approach of actually just sharing my full screen with you. And I think if I go to read a view, we should be able to go through it. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Background. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to click a couple of times and hopefully that will all be okay. Okay, great. I think we're on track now. So just to resume, second bit of background to share is that, as I mentioned, police services across the UK have started to experiment with AI. But there's a little understanding of which use cases of AI are acceptable to the public. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, it is local forces or kind of regional police services that are experimenting with AI, and there's little coordination at the national level. Well, certainly there wasn't when we started this project in terms of which use cases it can be used for and should be used for, how it should be used. And I think that is a fundamental part of why we were commissioned to do this project in the first place, to try and give some sort of extra context to central policing authorities to be able to provide some guidance on which use cases are acceptable. So the objectives of this project. So we were commissioned by the Home Office and Science-Wise to conduct a public dialogue on this issue. The objectives were to, as I mentioned just there, inform police development of AI and support policing in operational decisions relating to AI. And secondly, to raise awareness of participatory methods within the Home Office and police forces. So by participatory methods, we mean things like deliberation and public dialogue, where we are not only interested in hearing what people think, but trying to involve them in the process of engaging with them to solicit their kind of recommendations and advice for how policy should be made, and working together to create those as a group of participants, as opposed to something like a traditional focus group where we would be looking just to take a snapshot of public opinion, hand that over to the client with some recommendations, and then the recommendations are made from there. So, a little bit more about deliberative dialogue. As I mentioned, the project was jointly funded by the Home Office and Science-Wise. So, Science-Wise is a public engagement program which supports government bodies to commission deliberative public dialogue projects. What did it look like in practice? We engaged 58 members of the public, and they took part in 4 workshops, and 2 of those were online and 2 were in-person day-long sessions. And participants were split across 3 locations, which were Cardiff, Durham, and London. This very much just covered England and Wales. And why use dialogue? So the great thing about dialogue is that it allows participants to discuss issues and develop their thinking together before forming a view as a group. It's also great in the sense that you can have observers, particularly policymakers, coming along to what are quite long sessions, and quite a few of them, and really getting a glimpse into how the process of the public being provided information on the topic and educated on the topic helps them to inform their view, how it influences their opinions, and how they process that information. Ultimately, just what I'd like to flag here is that dialogue is about understanding public judgment, not public opinion. I think I've covered this already to some extent, but we are interested in what people, the kind of what people see as the outcomes, what recommendations they want to come to based on what they've heard, as opposed to just their opinion on the matter as a whole. It's worth flagging here that this wasn't a process of literally making final decisions for the police to implement. There was no duty to implement them, for example. It's more a process of kind of public engagement and research to kind of solicit those kind of advice, recommendations, and principles for inspiration of policy making. Just to be completely clear there, that this wasn't a statutory binding exercise or anything like that. So the recruitment approach, who we spoke to, essentially. So we used a purposive first approach to recruitment, which allowed us to target affected audiences. In practice, what that means is that, as well as just wanting to speak to a sample that was largely representative of the population of England and Wales, we also wanted to highlight the voices of some specific groups. So that's particularly groups that are known to be disproportionately affected by policing, groups that feel over-policed, and indeed seldom heard groups. So groups where their voices aren't heard quite so prominently, or where amplification is needed to make sure that they are heard due to all sorts of historical, societal factors. So we stratified our recruitment within demographic groupings as well as other relevant factors. So opinions on AI, attitudes towards policing, ethnicity, age, and more, before using random sampling within those groups. And we used various approaches to reach people in practice. So cold calling using commercial lists, targeted social media outreach, on-street intercepts, and door knocking. We spoke to 58 participants in total. And as I mentioned, we chose 3 locations across England and Wales. Cardiff as a bit of central hub for Wales, Durham to cover the north of England, and London to cover the south. Obviously, when I say it like that, it sounds like an oversimplification, but due to practical constraints, that made a lot of sense. And we set a very wide radius so that people were able to travel into these locations as well. So it wasn't just people within inner cities, for example, that were participating. So that ensured a bit of a mix of attitudinal positions and geographical spread and contrasting contexts as well, which I think is particularly important in the context of policing. So in terms of urban and rural settings. Um, the sampling and recruitment also reflected local populations. So, for example, the ethnicity profile of London was different from that of Durham, reflecting the reality. So, in terms of what we did in practice, and you can see that we actually did this work because you can see me in the background there in one of the sessions. Firstly, we started with an initial learning session, which was an online discovery workshop where we gave participants the initial background to AI and policing and set the scene, provided some initial information. Secondly, came the deliberation. So we ran an in-person workshop in each of the locations where participants developed their understanding of AI and policing and were introduced to three basic use cases. Third was an online reflection workshop. So we reflected on the previous sessions and also introduced the participants to three more complex versions of those use cases, which I'll come on to in a moment. And then there was deciding. So session four was an in-person workshop where participants decided what advice they would give to the Home Office on AI and policing based on what they had heard so far. So I mentioned use cases just there. So just to give you a sense of what I mean, we decided to highlight some specific use cases in the sense of kind of specific ways in which AI tools could be used to enhance policing in real life scenarios as a means of, firstly, targeting discussions and making them not too general, and secondly, giving the necessary nuance to policymakers so that they could understand areas where participants were more comfortable or where they had some specific advice to give, and then areas where they were less comfortable or where there was different advice needed there. So I'll run through the use cases very quickly before going into the full findings. Firstly, we had handling 101 calls. So this would effectively be AI agents or software playing the role of 101 call handlers to triage those calls and potentially signpost people towards the necessary sources of advice or support. Secondly, we had summarizing data. So this means AI software being used to sift through and find patterns in very large data sets. So that might be it might be all sorts of evidence, for example, CCTV files, combing through those, which would normally take a human many hours to watch. It's the kind of thing that AI can do much quicker. So use cases like that, or summarizing a very large number of statements or documents collected on a certain case, for example. And then finally, we had predictive policing. So this is AI again being used to pull together and analyze large data sets, including in real time, to detect crime hotspots or areas where changes in circumstance might mean that certain crimes are more likely to happen, so that the deployment of resources by police could be carefully targeted and increased or decreased to respond to the upcoming need. We also eventually presented more complex versions of these use cases and brought them out a bit to discuss some what-if scenarios effectively. So on one-on-one calls, we discussed the idea of transferring AI being used to transfer some people from 101 to 999, so a bit of a triaging service there, and also potentially even handling 999 calls. Summarizing data, we also discussed the idea that it might be used to summarize more sensitive forms of data. So, particularly personal data, for example, or data that was about people's experiences of particularly troubling crimes. And finally, predictive policing, we also discussed the idea of AI being used to predict reoffending in the context of things like parole decisions, for example. So, we'll move on to some findings now. So at the end of the workshops, the participants ranked the use cases in terms of acceptability. It's worth mentioning that I'm going to show you the kind of overall, a sort of average or broad view across the group. It did vary across individuals and different groups within our participants. Um, And acceptability was broadly seen to be contingent on whether the AI was making decisions in each use case and whether participants felt the use case required human nuance or empathy, which broadly speaking, people didn't feel that it could replicate properly as of yet. So I've ranked these from more acceptable to less acceptable in line with that arrow on the screen. The most acceptable use case overall seemed to be summarizing basic information. This is the kind of thing that people are used to seeing AI do already, which seems like a straightforward administrative task, and therefore people are broadly comfortable. Handling 101 calls largely fell into the same category as well. Summarizing sensitive information, so the more complex version of that first use case, people were a little bit less comfortable with that. I think on the basis that it raises various concerns to do with data protection, privacy, and the extent to which AI can be trusted to handle that properly, and also questions of what sorts of personal data are acceptable to include in that sort of analysis. Predicting high crime hotspots, slightly less acceptable. I think there was broad support for it in many groups, but there were some concerns about the possibility for bias occurring there, exacerbating issues with over-policed communities. Transferring 101 calls to 999 was broadly seen as one of the less acceptable use cases. I think that comes back to that point of human nuance or empathy. So people obviously call 999 when they are in moments of great distress in their lives. And there was a sense that human operators may still be needed to provide the sort of kind of human understanding and comfort that is needed to firstly reassure people and keep them calm, but also properly understand the extent of the experience the extent of the emergency or the experience that they're undergoing. Finally, making decisions on reoffenders, so predicting reoffending, was the least acceptable use case. I think this is the only one that was seen as kind of punitive or potentially oppressive of people. So taking really serious decisions that could very negatively affect people's lives was seen as a bit of a step too far by a lot of people that AI was not necessarily ready to be trusted with as of yet. So some broad positive principles that people saw across the whole idea of using AI in policing, just to bring things together a bit. Broadly, I think people felt it had great potential to improve police services and the quality of some things that were delivered. And that was particularly true for improved efficiency. So delivering tasks that take up a lot of police time that could be used to put more people on the streets, for example, or work on their cases. Reduction in human error was also seen as a potential advantage. There was acknowledgement that human error is inevitable in any job, and using AI in policing could negate this. And finally, there was particular appreciation for use cases that were preventative and not reactive. That was particularly among those most supportive of those use cases, as I mentioned on the previous slide. But there were a few watch-outs or areas of real caution for our participants that they wanted to make sure that we highlighted. The first of these were there were concerns about a lack of oversight, and people insisted that there must be very serious oversight. So, broadly speaking, without human oversight, so having someone in the loop or someone being responsible for the quality of what the AI was doing, AI could potentially make mistakes or indeed just be working in a way that is counterproductive, introducing bias, that kind of thing. And the idea of there not being oversight in any of those use cases made people less comfortable with them. The loss of human interaction was also a concern. So some people felt AI was too limited in its ability to replicate that kind of human nuance, empathy, warmth that we currently get. Data security risks were also a serious watch out. So there was concern about data breaches, particularly if sensitive data is involved, particularly for those who haven't even committed a crime. And finally, errors seem inevitable, and people want to know about what will be done about that. So AI errors could impact individuals, reinforce stigmatization, and indeed multiply human error at industrial scale because it's doing so much. Before we wrap up, a few core questions that need to be answered for participants to feel that AI is being implemented transparently. So firstly, what does ethical look like? As I've mentioned throughout this report, there were some ethical concerns with AI that were highlighted, particularly to do with privacy, and people feel that we need to get to the bottom and establish some kind of guardrails for that before AI is used at large scale by the police. What's the evidence base? That's quite simply people want proof that AI works in the use cases that we've suggested here and can be trusted. What about job losses? This is obviously one of the hot topics in the wider AI debates. Will this mean police officers losing their jobs? And some people are concerned about that because they felt like it could be an exercise in the government spending money, saving money, as opposed to police officers actually being redeployed for greater efficiency. Who controls personal data? Touching on those data security concerns I mentioned earlier. And finally, is this just too much too fast? I think it will come as a surprise to no one that people do feel that the pace of progress on AI recently has been explosive, and there's a sense that that may continue as well. It can feel like a bit of a whirlwind. And in an area as sensitive as policing that has so much impact on people's lives, is that just too much and too fast? Finally, three things that are crucial for public support for implementation. Firstly, clear and effective oversight. So having someone who is responsible for overseeing what the AI is doing, making sure that it is working effectively and keeping an eye on it, auditing data that comes in and out, and having someone who is responsible for what happens and for whom there can be consequences if it goes wrong. Maximizing accuracy and minimizing bias. Again, this is making sure that it works as we want it to. So it has to work very effectively. People felt there was a high threshold for it to be introduced across use cases, and there was a particularly keen a sense that there could be bias introduced as well that must be minimized. And finally, just ensuring meaningful transparency. This is the kind of thing that people don't want to see to know is happening behind closed doors. They want to know how the police services are using AI, why they're using it, in what context, etc. And they want to know how effectively it's working so that people can be held to account. I think there's generally a broad sense that if we're going to introduce robots or machines to the mix, there still have to be humans that can be held democratically to account to maintain the policing by consent principles that we currently rely on. So that's everything in terms of findings and method. Just some final thoughts I wanted to share with you, just some kind of thought-provoking considerations that weren't covered in our report, but perhaps relevant here. So I think there's more to be done following on from this work directly with communities who already experience harm from over-policing. It's something that we've touched on in this, but wasn't necessarily a central theme that we were able to focus on throughout the whole of the report, and it's something that potentially needs more exploration. Secondly, the accountability structures that people wanted to see aren't in place yet. So we know that the individual police forces are using AI, including some of the use cases that we highlighted here. And we're acutely aware that the structures that people really wanted in the report aren't in place to monitor those yet. And it's something for us, everyone to keep an eye on in future. Finally, another thing to think about, and this is very much an open question, I guess, is just what does the shift from police and crime commissioners to direct mayors mean for public engagement with policing more broadly? It's quite a big shift from the way things have been done for the last 15 years, I believe. And obviously, that could have implications here for what we've discussed today.